Hi there. Welcome to the From Lab to Launch podcast by Qualio, where we share inspiring stories from the people on the front lines of life sciences. Tune in and leave inspired to bring your life-saving products to the world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to From Lab to Launch by Qualio. I'm Meg, and I'll be your host for today. We're glad you're here. Before we jump in, just a reminder to please rate the show and share it with any of your science or biology nerd friends. We know you have some. Also, check out the show notes to learn more about our guest today or request to be on the show. We're very grateful for all the interest in the podcast lately. Today, we have Tony Ulwick on the show. Tony is the founder and CEO of Strategyn, a strategy and innovation consulting firm. He is also the pioneer of jobs to be done theory and the inventor of the outcome-driven innovation, ODI. Outcome-driven innovation is a proven innovation process with an 86% success rate. Tony has worked with dozens of Fortune 500 companies, helping them make innovation more predictable. Tony absolutely has a lot to offer us and our listeners, so let's bring him in. Welcome to From Lab to Launch, Tony. We're so excited to have you speaking with us today. You're exactly the type of person and guest we love to have here on the show because our listeners can learn so much from you. So let's go ahead and get started.
Great. Thanks, Meg. I appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background, Tony?
Sure. I'd be happy to. I started my career at IBM back in the 1980s. And one of the first projects I worked on was supposed to change the way home computing was done around the world. And IBM was supposed to take over that position from Apple at the time. And the day after we introduced the product, the headlines in the Wall Street Journal read, "The PC Junior is a flop." And it was. It cost IBM about $1 billion. They pulled it from the market a year later. It was just a colossal failure. And that really got me interested in wondering, how could a company like IBM, with all its vast resources, waste all that money on a failed product? And I quickly realized it wasn't just IBM. This is common to nearly every company, and it's still a big problem today. So that launched my career into really trying to understand the mechanisms by which innovation fails, and how do you fix them? How do you make innovation more predictable so you can take a 90% failure rate and turn it into an 86% success rate, as you said?
Great. Your consultancy organization is called Strategyn. Can you tell us how this idea came about?
Sure. So as I was working at IBM, it was quite a natural progression to leaving and starting Strategyn in 1991. As I was working in IBM, trying to find a better way to innovate, I researched all different sources of processes around the globe. And I got to practice some of these processes inside IBM. So I was more or less an internal IBM consultant, and I worked in a whole variety of projects. And when I felt I got good enough at it, I said, well, maybe I should take the show on the road, so to speak, and go try my hand at consulting on my own. And that led to the creation of Strategyn in 1991. So it's been 31 years since I've been doing this, and we've applied this approach to so many companies, especially in the medical device space: Medtronic, J&J, Siemens, Abbott Labs, Stryker, Zimmer Biomet. It goes on. So we've really been able to fine tune the approach for the medical device community and others. Our clients range from in 30 different industries, but we've always had a large percentage of our work in the medical device space.
Why do you think that is, that you have such a high rate of companies with medical device backgrounds?
That's a great question, because I believe the answer is they have some of the longest development cycles, and they can't afford to get it wrong. Like if you miss a cycle and you don't have the right product at the right time, you're going to be sitting on the sidelines for quite some period of time before you can recover. So it's a high risk environment. and of course a high reward environment as well. So trying to mitigate the risk before you develop the product, before you take it through all the regulatory agencies to try to get it approved, makes great sense. And we see other industries like that too that have very long development cycles that just can't afford to get it wrong.
Great. Is that where the outcome-driven innovation comes in?
It does. Yeah, that's exactly right. We've developed a process that's it comes from a different perspective. You've probably heard the quote that people don't want quarter-inch drills, they want quarter-inch holes. And most companies look at the world of innovation through the lens of the drill maker as opposed to the hole maker. And when you look at the world through the lens of the hole maker, everything looks very different. And the first thing you notice is why people buy products in the first place, which is to get a job done, is the way we say it. They're trying to accomplish something. They're trying to avoid something. They're trying to achieve a set of goals or objectives. So, now, if people are buying products to get a job done, then instead of defining markets around products and technologies, why don't we define markets as groups of people and the job they're trying to get done? So it could be a surgeon who's trying to repair a rotator cuff, for example, would constitute a market, as opposed to defining it in any other way. The advantage of this, of course, is those markets are stable over time. And now you can anchor your strategy on something that's not going to change when the technology changes or when your product changes. So that's a big advantage. But the other advantage is you can actually go study the job the customer is trying to get done and extract what we call their outcomes. This is where outcome-driven innovation comes from. How do they measure success as they go about get the job done? And it turns out that these are the metrics people use to judge the value of products, and they are knowable, discoverable in the customer discovery process. So extracting this set of outcomes, which there's usually anywhere from 75 to 100 or more, we can then quantify them with customers to figure out which ones are unmet and which ones are really important to them and not well satisfied with today's solutions. And we can pinpoint where they're struggling to get the job done at a level of granularity that makes innovation predictable. And so that's why we call it outcome-driven innovation. That starts with the end in mind. What are they trying to achieve? And where are they struggling to achieve those very specific goals? And then how can we help them get the job done better?
I love that, starting with the end in mind. Can you tell us about your first client to implement this approach and what the outcome was for them?
Oh, I love that story. Thanks for that one. The very first client outside of IBM was a company called Cordis Corporation. And Cordis eventually was acquired by J&J. But here, the story is they were in the angioplasty balloon market. They had been steadily losing market share. They were down to about 1.5%, and they had to do something different. So they used this approach that we talked about, and we talked to interventional cardiologists. We figured out, how do they measure success as they're trying to restore blood flow in an artery, and we captured 70-ish needs. We quantified them, and we found that there are about 15 needs that were highly underserved or unmet, as we say. And so we got the engineering team together and said, if we can solve these for these 15 unmet needs, you can create a product that will win in the market. At least there's the opportunity to get the job done better. So they proceeded to put together a new line of angioplasty balloons. They released them a year and a half later. So there were 19 in total. All of them became number one or number two in the market. Their market share went from 1.5% to over 20%. Their stock price climbed quite dramatically, about an 8-fold increase. They got acquired by J&J a couple of years later. And there was one other kicker in there too, which I found interesting. We discovered that there was one need that was off the chart in terms of being unmet, and that was minimizing the likelihood of restenosis, which is the recurrence of the blockage. Sure. And they said, well, we're working on a device in our lab, along with 50 other things, that can actually minimize the likelihood of restenosis. And we said, well, you should really triple down your resources on that and get it to market before anyone else does, which they did. they were the first to come out with the stent, the heart stent, back in that time frame. And that in and of itself propelled them into a billion-dollar market in just 2 years.
Wow.
So I can go on too. There's one other element of this.
Please.
They had the foresight to file patents on drug-eluting stents, and that ended up paying off because Guidant copied those drug-eluting stents a number of years later. I think the payout was $600 million because they could protect their intellectual property, and they knew enough to patent that once they discovered the opportunity and understood the value of the invention that they had in their hands.
So even though they weren't able to capitalize on that, just protecting that IP ahead of time really
helped
made
pay
some
off.
opportunities. Yeah. Great.
Yes.
Yeah, we talked a lot about the life sciences industry. Are there other applications outside of life industries? And does it change the approach depending on the industry?
The approach doesn't change. And we've applied it in 30 plus industries, from medical devices, as we talked about, to financial services, to industrial equipment, to test equipment, to pumps. We've done over 1,000 different projects, and the approach works exactly the same. And this is something I really like about the approach, because it doesn't it doesn't assume a solution up front. It assumes people are trying to get a job done, and once you figure out where the needs are unmet, it helps inform product development. It helps inform service development. It helps inform digitalization strategy and software tools and so on. What we found, like in the agriculture space, for example, we studied the job of growing a crop. And it's a complicated process, believe it or not. And there were about 150 different outcomes associated with growing a crop. And roughly speaking, about a third of them had to do with the hardware, we'll call it, the seeds, the equipment that you need to harvest, things like that. But another third of them had to do with service components, that require people's help somewhere in the process. And another third related to information that the grower needed to make decisions throughout that process. So studying that job led to our clients' development of better products, improved services, and to digitalize farming as a platform, which wasn't a thing 15 years ago when we discovered all that. So it's so you can see the breadth and depth of the application, and it's pretty powerful.
That's amazing. Can you tell us more about your jobs to be done theory?
Sure. Well, the theory is pretty straightforward, and I briefly touched on it. It's the notion that people buy products to get a job done. Well, if that's the case, then again, as we said, let's define markets as a group of people getting a job done. And what's really fun about this theory is that it gives you a very meaningful way from which you can growing from the core at a high level. Most products don't get an entire job done. They just get part of a job done. And if that's the case, then a next logical extension to your product would be to get more of the job done. And there's even, as you lay out the job, you can lay out the different steps in the job. And it's often the case that there's some adjacent steps, like your product may get step number 4 done really well, and that's it. Well, why don't we consider step 3 and step 5? And you can start expanding your product to get more of the job done. And over the years, all products evolve and markets evolve to solutions that will get the entire job done on a single platform. It may take 20, 30 years, but that's the direction it takes. And jobs theory says if you recognize this and you know what the job is and you understand it at a deep level, you can accelerate the pace at which you get more of the job done and claim that ultimate position as the platform owner in that market. And the rest is just details.
Identify those jobs, those things to be done, and then the rest is just details to fall into place.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. We talked a little bit about industries and types of clients. What stage do clients usually reach out to Strategyn?
I'd say, about 95% of our clients already have a product in the market, but some don't. Some don't even have a product in mind. They haven't even picked a market yet. But that's kind of rare. Even people that aren't in a market yet, they already have a product in mind, which means they've inherently chosen a market. So in other words, as soon as you have a product in mind, you're assuming that there's a group of people trying to get the job done, and they might want your product for that. So you're assuming a group of people and a job to be done. And oddly enough, a lot of startups don't recognize that. Um, they'll have an idea, but they don't know who the job executor is. They're not sure of what the entire job is, and of course, the success rates in startups aren't very good. They're somewhere around 5%, 10%. So, but applying this at the startup level makes good sense. We have a number of companies that do that, but the bulk of our client base, are Fortune 500 companies.
And are those Fortune 500 companies looking to improve existing products or innovate new products, or both?
Both. A lot of them, I told you the Kotler story. That's interesting in that their motivation was to regain market share, right? They were struggling, so turning the business around. Others just want to make sure they stay ahead, right? If you're already the market leader, you want to make sure you remain in the market leadership position. You don't want to get disrupted. You're looking for these opportunities that are underserved, and you want to get to them before your competitors do. So that makes sense too. So we see it from a lot of different angles, but it's often the case that there's a struggle or a challenge that companies are facing, and they're trying to overcome some barrier, a competitive barrier, regulatory barrier, that's causing them some friction and standing in the way of their growth, basically.
That's some great insights. What has been a really interesting product for you so far at Strategyn?
We'll see. There's been a lot of interesting products, but I would have to say one of the more interesting things that we have been involved with was we were working with. We used to do these events in Aspen at the Aspen Institute, and we'd have people come in from all around the country or different parts of the world, for that matter, and we would talk about innovation, talk about outcome-driven innovation, how to apply it. We'd take people through mock exercises and so on. And we met 3 gentlemen that were visiting from a military company. And turns out they weren't working for the military company. They were actually working for the CIA. And they loved the concept, and they thought this could really be a helpful idea in developing products for the CIA as well. Now, we never got to personally develop those products, but we did get to go to Langley and at the CIA headquarters and train people on how to execute the ODI process. And that was just a remarkable feeling, of contribution where something like that could happen.
That's amazing. I imagine there were some security clearances involved to get on site and such there. So
there was indeed.
That does sound very interesting. What are some tips you would give to someone who is currently in the process of wanting to bring a new product to market?
Well, I'd say the tip is just make sure you do your customer discovery work before you get too far down the road. A lot of people are afraid to talk to customers, and because it's a skill, first off, and you're not sure what to ask them. So it can become an uncomfortable conversation. But basically, just ask them what they're trying to achieve. What is that job they're trying to get done? How do they break down those steps? How do they measure success? And by asking those questions, you can get a good feel for whether your product is going to get the job done better or not. And one thing that we've discovered over the years is there's a threshold for success. Like if your product's only going to get the job done 1% better, then you may rethink it, right? The threshold is somewhere around 15%. Like, if you can get the job done 15% better or more, you stand a pretty good chance of taking some market share in the space. So the advice is make sure it's getting the job done significantly better. Otherwise, you're going to be a Me Too product, and it's going to be very hard to succeed.
That's some great tips. Thank you. So switching gears back to you, what has been one of the biggest challenge or lessons in your career, if you had to pick just one?
Oh, gosh. So many lessons learned. I'd say one of the biggest lessons is just being persistent at perfecting something, like the innovation process. It's a journey. We're still on the journey. It's still not perfect, right? There's still risk that needs to be mitigated, but just staying focused on one thing and really being good at one thing, as opposed to spreading yourself too thin, I think is a really good bit of advice for startups too, for anyone in their careers as well. Spreading yourself too thin can dilute your ability to excel in any one area. So being really good at one thing generally, pays off.
Yeah, I think that's some great advice kind of in all areas of life. Can't do everything, right?
Yeah.
So thinking back to the start of your career, what piece of advice would you give yourself looking back, and why?
I would say enjoy it, because it goes fast. It goes by quickly.
It does.
And just make every day enjoyable. See the joy in it, not the grind in it, and then years later you'll be able to look back on it and be happy with what you did.
Yeah, that's great advice. One question we like to ask all of our guests: if we ran into you at a bookstore like Barnes & Noble, what section would we find you in?
That's a great question. I would probably be in the business book space. And I've spent most of my career there. But if I had to jump out, I'd like to find things that just are funny, just more along the comedy front. So I could be found over there as well, laughing in the back corner.
That's great. Laughing is so good for the soul. Well, thank you, Tony, for joining us here from Lab to Launch. I learned a lot from you today, and I know our listeners did too. Where can we go to follow you, learn more about your theory and the ODI?
Well, Meg, there's a number of different places. Our company website at Strategyn.com is a great place to go. People could contact me at Ulwick@Strategyn.com. And we've just released a new innovation platform as well that people can use that guides them through the ODI process. It's called ODI Pro, and that can be found at Strategyn.com as well.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining us today, Tony.
Meg, thanks so much for the invite. I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of From Lab to Launch, brought to you by Qualio. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and give the show a positive review. It really helps us out. For more information about Qualio, our guest today, or to be a guest on a future episode, please refer to the show notes. Until next time.